Sorry about that. I hit the pause button on that one, and but I was over halfway through. So we'll continue with Teddy Roosevelt in 1912 election. So Teddy Roosevelt never invited Booker T. Washington to dinner again, but did consult him regularly on the side, quietly. He also appointed the first president to appoint African Americans to federal positions, like custom collectors, like assistant district attorneys, even in southern states. 300th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown, Teddy Roosevelt also openly gives a speech promoting and supporting immigrants. He thought they were good for the country. They would create a, quote, new and distinct ethnic type. So Teddy Roosevelt, for his times, is very progressive, I would say. Completely for ours, no, we would not consider him completely for ours, but clearly for his times. Okay, now the flip side of that is Teddy Roosevelt, slide number 50, as conservative. And he does a number of things that are the opposite. Sorry, wrong side. Number one, which is not progressive at all, he is very pro-war. Remember, he grew up as a 49-pound weakling, and he made himself into a powerhouse and believed everybody else and every nation could do the same. This, of course, is Darwinian, very Darwinian survival of the fittest. War was good, a battle was good not only for individuals but also for nations because it made them stronger. He's heavily involved with the Navy. He was assistant director of the Navy. When he gave a speech to the Naval College, in a single speech, he mentioned the word war 67 times, somebody counted. So he's very pro-war, which is, in our views, pretty obnoxious. He is a great white hunter. There is that slide there, slide 51, with Teddy Roosevelt, and we cringe when we see this slide. He slaughtered a rhino. Why do we cringe? Of course, because today they're heavily endangered and being slaughtered right and left. At the same time, he's a conservationist. He also is a big hunter. After the presidency, after he retired from the presidency, the first thing he did is he went on an African safari for about a year. He took one of his sons with him. And while on this safari, he was doing it to get specimens to stuff for museums. So I knew all about Teddy Roosevelt when I was a little kid because the museum in Chicago, like the one in Washington, D.C., is full of animals that Teddy Roosevelt shot and brought home to stuff. These are all Roosevelt kills. On his African safari, he spent 10 months in Africa. For the Smithsonian Museum, he shot, inventory, 550 large, 3,400 small mammals, close to 3,000 birds, 8,500 vertebrates. He had a group of 200 porters when he went on this trip that carried his stuff around. He shot himself 20 rhinos, 17 lions, 11 elephants, and 9 giraffes. And many of these were family groups for the museums. So you kill the parents and you kill the cubs or the young ones as well, which they would have starved anyway. We just cringe at this today. It's a horrible thing to think about. But you have to remember, Africa in the early 1900s, there were a lot of these. They were not endangered. He didn't see himself as doing anything wrong, although we do today. They made a movie of his safari. Film was just coming in. The movie flopped commercially. But we all know something about Teddy Roosevelt in Africa because when you go to the theaters and you see an MGM film and you have that big head of the lion roaring for the MGM films, that lion's roar was filmed on Teddy Roosevelt's safari. So not only do we have teddy bears, but we have a roaring lion as well. So the pro-war thing. The other thing he did, slide number 53, you can see is the Great White Fleet. He had no problems with warfare. He said, as Secretary of the Navy, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, I would welcome almost any war because I think this country needs one, which today we find totally obnoxious. The Great White Fleet, when he rose in the Navy, he insisted and got the money from Congress to build a fleet of 28 large battleships, painted them white. Most battleships are painted the color of the ocean, gray-green. Why do you paint them white? Pretty much this is a show of force. He sent them on a world tour, particularly to Asian ports, particularly to Japan. Teddy Roosevelt is the first man to say, watch Japan. We're going to have problems with Japan. And he was absolutely right. Japan was arming. It was militarizing. Even then, he's quoted as saying, I dread the Japanese more than any other nation. He predicted Pearl Harbor much earlier than it happened. So he's sending these battleships basically painted bright white. No, don't mess with the United States. This is an example of big stick diplomacy. Big stick, the phrase came from an African proverb, walk softly, carry a big stick. You negotiate first. If they don't do what you want, you take out the big stick and you beat them over the head with it. And Teddy Roosevelt had no problem with that. Diplomacy first, then force, which he did use. World War I breaks out. He's retired. He is no longer president. He's 60 years old. He ran down to the recruitment office and tried to enlist in the infantry as a regular foot soldier in World War I. They threw him out. They thought he was crazy. But he totally believed warfare was a good thing. All four of his sons and one of his daughters were involved in World War I. Four of his sons fought. One was seriously injured. They all fought, from what the records show, very honorably and very well. The youngest was killed at age 21. And I don't know whether they had a choice to enlist or not, but Teddy Roosevelt always blamed himself for that death. He never got over it. Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. If you remember the Monroe Doctrine, it says that Europeans stay out of the Americas, Latin America as well as North America. This was 1820 under President Monroe, and we will stay out of European affairs. Teddy Roosevelt adds a corollary to that. And the corollary to that is Europeans, you stay out of Latin American affairs, but America can interfere when we think it's justified. And this is exactly what we did, okay? This is the exact corollary. This is the wording. If a nation shows that it knows how to act with decency and efficiency in political and social matters, if it keeps order and pays its obligations, it need fear no interference from the United States. Chronic wrongdoing or impotence to the exercise of an international police power will create us acting as an international police power only as a last resort. So the United States can interfere in Latin America if they are not behaving, quote unquote, properly. Who determines that? We do. And there were some issues with this. In the early 1900s, a number of countries in Latin America had defaulted on loans. Their finances were in a wreck. And the United States moved in to protect American business, to protect American interests, and also European interests as well. In Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, America took over financial control for over 30 years because the country was in default. It was bankrupt. Venezuela owed $62 million to Britain and France. We took over and ran their finances for over 30 years. Haiti. We moved into Haiti, 1915. We didn't leave until before World War II. We were there for almost exactly 20 years. What do? In Haiti, we do what we do very well. We built roads, set up phone systems, we did schools, we did clinics, irrigation systems, sanitation programs. We built the infrastructure. We stayed for 20 years. 10 years in Nicaragua as well. China. We went into China. China was in chaos, disintegrating. The Boxer Rebellion attacked Europeans. Europeans wanted to cut China apart into different, what they call spheres of influence, and everybody would get a piece because China still is a huge trading center. A lot of market in China. And Teddy Roosevelt is the one actually who held China together and said, no, we are not going to dismember China. We are not going to cut it in pieces. You can each have your trading zone, but China will stay in one piece. So America will become, quote, the civilized and ordinary power to properly police the world. This is when we become the world's policeman. Remember, we have just become an imperial power. We are already in the Philippines and in parts of Spain, old empire. And Teddy Roosevelt is the guy that makes us a world power. The other area that we interfere with in Central America, of course, is Panama, the Panama Canal. It was very apparent that a canal was really needed through Central America. The French had for 22 years been trying to build one. They gave up in 1890. They had made little progress. They had dug part of a ditch, but due to malaria, they had lost over 5,000 workers, and they finally gave up. Colombia, there was no Panama. There was no country of Panama. It was owned by Colombia. It was a province in Colombia. Colombia was bankrupt in the middle of a civil war. The U.S. clearly wanted a canal. We are now a two-ocean nation, and it is a matter of national security as well as trade. It cut the distance from one coast to the other in half, from close to a year to about 4 to 5 months. In 1898, it took 64 days for a battleship to get from San Francisco to Florida. 90 days to get to the Pacific. So Japan and Pacific nations could get to Hawaii well before we could get there. We would only be halfway there. America is now a global power. She's looking at the Pacific. We have to have a canal. They proposed Nicaragua, which also has a lake there, and would have made a canal a little bit easier to build, but there was some secret lobbying going on in Congress. The senators were clearly bribed, and all of a sudden the interest focuses on Panama. So 1903, Colombia is in a civil war. We tried to buy Panama from Colombia. Colombia refused. Colombia wanted a whole lot more money than she was willing to settle for earlier. And Teddy Roosevelt's response, okay, bring out the big stick. This is a perfect example of big stick diplomacy. Teddy Roosevelt sends U.S. warships to both sides of Panama, the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. He lands 400 Marines. Now remember, Panama is already in a civil war with other parts of Colombia, so there was popular support for this. And after the deaths of one Colombian peasant and one donkey, I don't know why the donkey is important, but it's always listed there, the 400 Marines take possession of the Panama Canal Zone. Panama seceded, withdrew from Colombia, and the United States backed them. Government officials in Colombia clearly got some money, were bribed along the way. Colombian troops are withdrawn, and the United States paid the Colombian government $10 million and an annual rate of $250,000 for a 10-mile wide strip to build the canal in. And as Teddy Roosevelt said, while the debate goes on in Congress, the canal does also. How did we get the Panama Canal? We went in and we took it. Big stick diplomacy. He actually visited the canal. Teddy Roosevelt is the first president after Grant. Grant went to Mexico. He went down to Panama and actually saw the canal. It was completed in 1914, and now we have a strategic canal. Strangely enough, Teddy Roosevelt gets a Nobel Peace Prize. How does a guy who promotes war get a Nobel Peace Prize in 1906? This is the first for the United States, not the last, but the first. Japan, which had been increasingly militarily, creates a war with Russia. Russia and Japan are fighting over Sakhalin Peninsula, an area in between the two of them. And this war goes on for well over a year. Japan at this point has also invaded Korea, is under Japanese control. The war is deadlocked on this Russian peninsula. Huge loss of life by the thousands on both sides. Japan had destroyed the Russian fleet of 22 ships. Both Russia and Japan are ready to quit. Huge losses on both sides. And Russia, of course, the capital of Russia, Moscow, is about 8,000 miles away from the Pacific. Both of them want to save face. Teddy Roosevelt believes, intuitively sees this. He would like both Russia and Japan weakened. Again, he's watching Japan and is worried about Japan. He doesn't want Japan to move in and occupy China like they have moved in and occupied Korea. So we will, as Teddy Roosevelt said, we will have to dread the Japanese more than any other nation. And he calls both of their diplomats into the White House to negotiate a ceasefire and a peace treaty. What he didn't tell either of them is that he called the other guy in as well. They both think, we're going to talk with Roosevelt and we'll see what will happen. So he gets them both at the White House, very close to each other in time. He gets them in a room, he locks the door basically and says, you're not leaving this room until you negotiate a settlement. They spent all day negotiating, ramrodded by Teddy Roosevelt, and they actually got a settlement. So Teddy Roosevelt actually ended a war, oddly enough, although both sides are ready to end the war. He suggested, in quotes, that Russia buy half of the Sakhalin Peninsula from Japan, because Japan had occupied it, and basically Russia paid off Japan and got half of their territory back. When Teddy Roosevelt got the prize money for the Nobel Prize, because it comes with money, he donated the prize money to found a peace institute. Again, how ironic is this for a guy who loves war? So, Teddy Roosevelt, complicated figure. He is absolutely a progressive. He is absolutely a conservative, too. It's for you to judge which side you think is more dominant. Not easy. He's a difficult, tricky guy. Okay, 1912 election, slide number 58. 1912 comes along. Teddy Roosevelt became president accidentally. When Woodrow Wilson was assassinated, he runs in 1904 on his own. He is elected overwhelmingly, huge majority in the polls and also in the Electoral College. And he had promised when he ran in 1904, I will step down after this term. He said it was the dumbest thing I ever did. This is the only job he really liked, the only job that could really keep him busy enough to use this energy because he's hyperactive. So he promoted his right-hand man, William Howard Taft, who had been Secretary of War under Teddy, his good friend. Teddy campaigned for him, handpicked him as his successor. Taft was an honest person, a good administrator, very slow, very cautious, and as you can see in slide 60, something over 340 pounds, clearly obese. The famous story about Taft is he got stuck in the bathtub at the White House and they had to take it out and build a bigger bathtub in the White House. Everybody always remembers that story. He would fall asleep in cabinet meetings. He hated politics. Why is this guy president? Because his wife was very ambitious and pushed him. So Taft said himself, every time somebody says, Mr. President, I look around for Teddy Roosevelt. I never thought I'd be president. I wasn't ready for it. But Teddy Roosevelt also promoted him. He thought Taft would continue his programs. Unfortunately, Taft did not surround himself with progressives and college professors and people of all different opinions. He surrounded himself with businessmen and corporate lawyers. Not surprisingly, his programs become very conservative. He appointed a corporate lawyer as Secretary of the Interior in charge of government lands, and the first thing he did was open 1 million acres to development in return for money kickbacks. He fired the head of the Forest Service, who was a good friend of Teddy Roosevelt, and begins opening forests to lumbering and mineral exploration. Teddy Roosevelt, who's on safari in Africa, his friends write him, and he says, "What's going on here? I appointed Taft, who was supposed to continue my programs. Instead, he's undermining everything I've done, especially the environmental stuff, which is Teddy's baby, of course." Teddy Roosevelt is only 50 years old. He's still young. He comes roaring back and says, "The hell with this. I will form my own political party, and I will run in 1912. He creates the Progressive Party, nicknamed the Bull Moose Party, from a speech by Teddy Roosevelt. When they asked him, "You're running again," he said, "Yeah, I'm fit as a bull moose." And that became the Bull Moose Party. His program, the New Nationalism, if you look at his program, it is very, very close to socialism. This is big government with a vengeance. He wanted a minimum wage, national minimum wage. He wanted a national 8-hour day, safety regulations, an income tax on the wealthy, a higher inheritance tax, all kinds of business regulations, child labor laws, completely a socialist program. He is in Milwaukee giving a speech, walking up on the stage to give a speech to a large number of supporters, and a German immigrant who had been promised a political job and not gotten it, so the spoiled system here, with a .38 caliber pistol, walks up to Roosevelt as he's going up to the stage to give his speech, pulls out the pistol, and shoots him in the chest from 20 feet away. He couldn't miss. Fortunately, being Roosevelt, he had a glass case in his pocket, metal glass case, and Teddy talks a lot. He had his speech, which was pretty hefty, folded over in half, also in that pocket. So the bullet, before it got into Roosevelt, went through a metal glass case and about half an inch worth of papers. Also lodged about 1.5 inches in Teddy's chest after it went through that. Would have killed him otherwise. So his aides grab the guy and haul him off. "Mr. Roosevelt, let's go to the hospital. Let's check you out." It landed about 3 inches away from his heart. But Teddy Roosevelt is a former prize fighter. Look at the guy. I mean, he's all muscle. So it didn't nick any major arteries, thank goodness. And Teddy Roosevelt says, "No, I'm not going to the hospital. These people came to hear a speech. I am going to give my speech." Blood is trickling down his white shirt at the same time from this bullet hole. He's carrying a bullet hole in him. He buttons his jacket, he walks up on stage, and he talks for 90 minutes. And Teddy Roosevelt talks, throws his arms around, gestures, and everything. At the end of the speech, he walks off the stage and collapses. And then they took him to the hospital. They never removed the bullet. It was too close to his heart. So he went through the rest of his life with a bullet hole. 1912 election is used as one of the most interesting and most important in American history, and has a very strong moral for our own times. And it has happened more than once. Who is running? Teddy's Bull Moose Progressive Party. If you look at the statistics there, they get 4 million votes. They get a lot of the popular votes. But Taft, who is running again, he's the Republican traditional party candidates, he gets 3.5 million votes. So the Republicans, being the more progressive wing, they split their votes between Taft, the regular party candidate, and the Roosevelt progressives. There is another candidate in this election, Eugene Debs, who is running on the Socialist Party platform. Eugene Debs was the leader of the Pullman strike many years earlier. He became a union leader, and then he became a Socialist Party leader. We had a Socialist Party in America. They ran Eugene Debs 4 times as presidential candidate, and 4 times he got over 1 million votes, with a lot less votes than we have today. He was a mesmerizing, magnetic speaker. The fact that he got 1 million votes and ran once from prison and got 1 million votes shows you that the workers, the average man, is ready for some changes. The country is demanding the government do more. And the Progressive Party is going to answer that call. So between the progressives and Eugene Debs and the Republicans, clearly the Democrats were in the minority, but the vote was split. Woodrow Wilson, the Democratic candidate, who was very moderate, got 6 million votes, and he won the election because the votes were split. So the moral to the story is, whenever there is a third party, can a third party win in America today? We're long overdue for one, but we've always had these two. Is it possible? It's extremely difficult. It's not impossible, but it is extremely difficult because the third party will pull from the one that is closest to it, and then the other guy will come in and win, most likely. This is what has happened with the Greens. With Ralph Nader in 2000, he polled about 1% of the vote, and he pulled just enough votes away from Al Gore that the Republican Bush won. That's another case of a third party pulling votes away from the one that it is close to, and the other guy wins. It's not the only time, but it has happened more than once in American history. So it is very, very difficult for a third party to win at present in America with the political system we have. The epilogue, Taft went to the Supreme Court, became a justice on the Supreme Court, a reasonably good one. Teddy Roosevelt, bitterly disappointed, takes off again, goes to South America, and decides to go down an unknown, unexplored river in the Amazon. He is given by the Brazilian government a small contingent of soldiers to help him, and also an officer who's probably the hero of the whole expedition, who knew something about jungle travel in the Amazon jungle, and he's given a choice. You can go down this river, we know something about it. You can go down this river, which is totally unexplored by Europeans, by white men, and we know there are cannibals on there, and we know people have disappeared down this river. So, of course, being Teddy Roosevelt, he picks the more dangerous river. He has one of his sons with him. He went down the river. He almost died. A number of them get malaria. He got malaria there, and he injured his leg and ended up being carried out by some of the soldiers. He couldn't even walk at the end. In the 6 weeks expedition, he lost 55 pounds. This is 25 pounds of his body weight. So it almost killed him. He never quite got over it. He never quite got over the malaria. He always walked with a limp after that point. He died about 5 years later, very young, at 61 years old. The malaria and the abscesses on his leg never healed. Another tidbit from this expedition that I think is very Teddy Roosevelt, when he packed for the trip, he packed cyanide pills. He figured if he became a burden to the expedition and it became a question of survival, that he would commit suicide rather than destroy the expedition. He packed his own cyanide pills. The reason he did not take them, because he thought about it, was that his son was along. And he thought if he committed suicide, this would really destroy his son as well. His son came out okay, healthy, out of the expedition. But, you know, how much backbone does it take to pack your own cyanide pills when you're going down the Amazon? So Teddy Roosevelt, huge figure in American history. 1912 election, the Progressive Party loses. Woodrow Wilson is now president. And that will be the next slide for chapter 20. What is this? Chapter 23. It's a big chapter. There's a lot of stuff. These are major characters. Take care. Stay safe.